as all my colleagues here, and I have been listening to all the sessions since 9 a.m. in the morning, I would like to thank the founders of ADİP and the organizers of this conference who have contributed to the process. This is really a very useful academic activity, and I hope it will go and continue like this. As you have said, one of the most saddening dimensions of this session is the passing away of Professor Azimli. Associate Professor Azimli's absence is very sad. Normally, he had a presentation to share with us, and the program was to start with his presentation. However, in his absence, we will be talking about his memory, his works, and in my academic life, this is an event that is a first for me. That's why I find it hard to talk about him. But I might say that when we talk about Azerbaijan and Alevism, as my colleague Doğan BERMEK underlines from time to time, he is one of the first names that comes to our minds. And when I read about the name Dilaver Azimli together with the concept of Alevism, I was very surprised, in fact. And he also had studies about Kızılbaş, and he is a member of the Azerbaijan Academy of National Sciences, and he has worked in the Institute of History. Among his works, we see the role of Kızılbaş in the strengthening of the Safevi dynasty and the role of Kızılbaş in the Azerbaijan state tradition, and Kızılbaş in Azerbaijan and Turkish state tradition. And he was also working on İran Melikov as a researcher of Alevism and the Bektashi Order. I believe many of us would be interested in reading his work. And we have lost him very recently on the 3rd of March this year. And regarding our colleague Dilaver, our presenter will share with us a short personal history, and afterwards we will hear his wife Arzu, who is with us today. His colleague Namık will also be sharing certain words, and those are people who know him and who respect him deeply, and Doğan and BERMEK will be taking the floor afterwards. First, let us hear the text about Associate Professor Azimli. Thank you very much, Şükrü Bey. Dilaver Azimli was born in the Adaş village of Azerbaijan's Jalilabad district on December 5, 1959. He completed his middle school education in Adaş village in 1977. Azimli carried out his military service between 1978 and 1980. He studied history at the Department of History at Bakü State University between 1987 and 1992. Upon graduation, he studied for a PhD degree at the same university. Meanwhile, he worked at the Ministry of Foreign Economic Affairs of the Republic of Azerbaijan between 1992 and 1994. Azimli worked as a journalist at various media organizations between 1994 and 2004. From 2003 until his death, he worked as a research assistant, then as an assistant professor, and finally as an associate professor at the branch of Azerbaijani history in the Middle Ages branch of the History Institute of Azerbaijan National Academy of Sciences. During this period, he gave lectures on the history of Azerbaijan and history of Turkic peoples at Bakü State University, Bakü Islamic University, and Azerbaijan State Pedagogical University. Associate Professor Azimli's main line of research focused on Azerbaijan's commercial relations with Western European countries between the 15th and 17th centuries, the economic competition between Safavid and Ottoman empires, faith and religion in Azerbaijan during the Middle and Modern Ages, and particularly traces of Alevism in country's history and analysis of cultural relations between Azerbaijani and North Caucasian peoples. Professor Azimli authored 2 books and dozens of articles and papers and attended a wide range of international and national scientific conferences as a speaker. His articles and papers were published in Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, Georgia, Uzbekistan, and Russia. Prominent among Azimli's articles and papers on Alevism are the place and status of the Kızılbaş on the consolidation of the Safavid Empire, the Kızılbaş and their character, the role of the Kızılbaş in the state tradition of Azerbaijan, the Kızılbaş in the historiography of Azerbaijan and Turkey, and Irene Melikov as a researcher of Alevism and the Bektashi Order. Associate Professor Dr. Dilaver Azimli died after a 2-month battle against coronavirus in Baku on March 3rd, 2021, and he was interred in his native village of Adaş. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Birgül. And now, we will hear those who knew Professor Azimli. From Kastamonu University, we have Professor Namık Musalı, who will be sharing some words about him. Yes, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you very much, dear Professor. First of all, I would like to greet each and every one of you, and I would like to thank the organizers of the conference. And we are here commemorating Professor Azimli, and thanks to them, this is being possible. Professor Azimli, one of the renowned historians of Azerbaijan, has died last month at the age of 61. And it is very hard for me to talk to you about his death. And that is why I'm getting very emotional. And nearly, we knew each other for 20 years. We had collaborations together. We presented at symposia. From 2003 to 2010, we worked at the History Institute of Azerbaijan National Academy of Sciences in the same branch, and we carried out joint activities. During those years, in Azerbaijan, in Iran, in Turkey, we attended different symposia together. And during these activities, our beloved professor became a very close friend of mine. He was a very competent researcher, and he not only sufficed with reading manuscripts and written literature. After making this type of a research, he was interested in carrying out field research, especially we have the areas of visit as the topic of our symposium, and when he carried out such research activities, he would have already conducted field research as well. And if there were tombs of individuals who were part of the events, he would definitely visit those sites, would have taken photographs and have read the inscriptions. And he had a very comprehensive archive consisting of such photographs. And while preparing presentations for symposia, he would share these photographs with the attendees as well. And regarding different sites in Azerbaijan, he had activities. And after the Soviet Union, concerning the preservation of these sites, he carried out very active work. And at the same time, he was a very good human being. And different researchers and his students would ask questions to him. And he was always answering them in detail, trying to explain things. And he would easily allocate time to these individuals. And before being an academician, he was a journalist. And because of this, he was very effective in communication. And he had many journalist colleagues. And he was present in many different media channels. And there were interviews of his being broadcasted on those channels. On important topics, he was able to talk about these in a very simple language, in a very plain language. That's why many individuals respected him very much. Our late professor was engaged in research, especially on Safavi dynasty and their relationships with the Ottoman Empire, and Europe was an area of interest for him. And he was also researching on the traces of Alevism in Azerbaijan. As I have recently mentioned, concerning the traces of Alevism in Azerbaijan, he had carried out very important activities because Alevism is not strongly present in Azerbaijan, but there are sites that you can visit on which Professor Azimli carried out extensive work. And he had publications that were published in different countries. And this has also been mentioned before. And we have to say that as a result of his activities and his work, we have many students of his working on the same topics in Azerbaijan. And hopefully, after his loss, his students will be continuing with these efforts, and we will see the results of such work in the coming years. We will be making use of his published work, and both his students and different researchers will continue the work in the same field. And lastly, I would like to thank you once again for inviting me to this activity. Thank you very much for listening. I'm grateful to all of you.
Çok teşekkür ederiz. Sağ olun.
Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing this with us. Associate Professor Azimli and his wife is with us today. Ms. Arzu KORKMAZER will now take the floor. Yes, the floor is yours, ma'am. I would like to greet all the participants of this conference, and I would like to say that I am very grateful for being able to be here and for being able to share my ideas about Dilaver. And his topic at this conference was about the Sheikh Safiullah's predecessor, Sheikh Cemalettin Shrine and complex. However, instead of this presentation, I will try to talk about Professor Azimli himself, and it's my luck to be able to do this. And the text I prepared for this occasion is called An Unfinished Symphony. And Professor Azimli, both in life and in academic activities, was such a character that could be resembled to a symphony. However, it is unfinished. He was an extraordinary man, and he was devoted to his ideals. And he also had a very rich spiritual world. He was a selected individual from the society, and he would transform anybody who would get in touch with him. And he managed not to betray himself in the name of false ideals. And during his school years, he was called the boy with the books because he loved reading and he was ambitious to get educated. He was very capable intellectually, and he did not choose the study of history by coincidence, because for him, history was very necessary and it was a very valuable field. And he would say history is like a deep ocean, and it is boundless, and it didn't have any boundaries. And he would say that it is any historian's debt and responsibility to share what this ocean can present us. So, in fact, he was a very important researcher who saw the study of history very valuable, and he wanted to make this area independent. And he wanted to raise the awareness of community and state, and we could easily see his efforts in the field. And in the realization of this, he worked very selflessly. And those who know him would appreciate that he was a very competent researcher. Without talking about a historical incident, he would make an extensive research on the topic, and he had an extensive knowledge in the area. And sometimes I would think that Dilaver would be able to read all the books available on the topic in the world. And as an historian, it is not sufficient to be knowledgeable, and you should definitely have in-depth information about a topic in order to be able to come to very just, very fair conclusions. And Professor Azimli was very good in doing this. His intellect, his in-depth research made it possible for him to stay away from any political influences and to be able to bring forward a new perspective about history. And I personally think that I had the opportunity to share some discussions and to listen to some interviews of his, and his last word would be his usually. And for certain problems that are open to discussion, how is it possible for you to give such satisfactory answers? And do you think that somebody else will be able to do this once you leave this world? And he would say that history is always a living organism and everyone has something to contribute, and my contribution can be resembled to a single drop, and I am saying what has not been told, and people coming after me will be saying what I wasn't able to say, and the new generations will be working on the history in a similar manner. As a character in the field of history, his success was being holistic, being unifying, and he had more than 100 publications. All of them were very valuable work. Some of them were international publications. He worked on Azerbaijan history, as well as he tried to see this from a regional perspective. Before me, a colleague of his talked, and he also had a postdoctoral research in the role of religion in the state tradition of Azerbaijan, which started in the pre-Islam period and going to the middle of the 18th century. And this was a very big responsibility. And for days, he worked on the topic. He came to Turkey, he worked at the archives, he read many documents that were found in the United Kingdom, and his professor told him that until so far, nobody had focused on this topic as good as you did. You are a person who is capable of doing this. In order to succeed in this endeavor, he would work very hard, and he learned the Muslim religion he had an in-depth information of the topic, and for Kızılbaş tradition, he also had extensive work. However, he died early, and certain work of his is unfinished. If he were to live further, he would definitely contribute substantively to the Azerbaijani and as well as world history. And Professor Azimli was very satisfied with his research and really enjoyed doing research. And whatever results he got, he was happy about it. And he never kept his knowledge to himself. He was very vocal, and even coming back from work, while coming home, his phone would ring and he would talk about the topics he was interested in with colleagues and students, and everybody was eager to learn from him. He was very sincere, very enthusiastic in sharing without accepting anything else from the other side, and he would get very happy, and he really did not want to keep any information to himself. He has endless energy. He was never tired. He would always find time to do things. And he was regarded as a very well-educated individual, both in state agencies and in private places. He would be invited to many meetings, and he was so efficient in his remarks and presentations that nobody wanted him to stop talking, and everybody was curious to listen to him. He was always invited to TV, radio channels to talk about Azerbaijani history and also about the political processes in Azerbaijan. And at one point, he said that I am very busy for this interview, and let's try talking with another historian, but the journalist told him that nobody would be as efficient in talking as himself, and he would allocate time to reading others' books and publications, and he would share his opinions with the authors of these books, making them very satisfied. And as Professor Musali said, he had many students with whom he was working. As I remember, in Baku State University, he was working with a student of his, and these students once listened to his lecture, and at the time he wasn't a professor of theirs, but the students asked the rector's office to appoint him as a professor instead of the old one. And his students, I also shared this, and they wouldn't suffice with a single or national literature. They would definitely engage in reading other publications as well. And I asked, why don't you suffice with limited publications? And he would then say, you should definitely open new horizons for the students. You should make them understand the new information. He made everything possible to have the students understand the details of history, as he loved his profession a lot. And Professor Azimli also talked about the problems in the field he's working. He focused with many problems with methodology and else. Last year, with a decision from the government, Dilaver and his colleagues objected to restricting the education of history in the country. And he is very happy that the process will start with the medieval history of the country. I did not want to interrupt. However, we have very limited time, and I will be very happy if you could conclude. I'm about to finish. You all know that the academic field is very difficult, and he was a bright star. History was his area of interest. However, he died early, and he couldn't say goodbye. Although I might talk a lot, I wouldn't be tired, because I have so many memories of his, which are very bright memories. And as you live, he will live together with you. And there is a subconscious that we cannot really understand about, but at this subconscious level, we will be talking with him, whether it be in library halls or in academic venues. And this expectation is present on my side, and I hope he will live through this. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for this very nice comments. And as the last word about Professor Azimli, we would like to listen to Mr. BERMEK. Thank you very much, Şükrü. Of course, there are so many things to be told about Dilaver. Most of them have already been said. I do not have much to add to this. He was an individual I trusted very much, and he was a very reliable historian. And I would like to quote two lines from Yahya Kemal. And let's say that those who leave early, we will have the opportunity to meet with them once again whenever the time comes. I hope he rests in peace. Thank you very much. Of course, this session of ours is about the historical conversion of TEKKES, ZAVIYES and MEVLEVIHANES. And this is a specific topic in the general context of this conference. We have been talking about the Alevi and Bektashi tradition, and we are at this point focusing on the spaces of these traditions. All the sessions are very valuable. However, this one is specifically valuable. And the previous session, in fact, was very useful, and I would like to thank them for their contributions. And the first speaker of this session will be Professor Soyer. Before giving him the floor, let me introduce him to you. And Associate Professor Soyer is a graduate of the Religious Studies Department of Ankara University. And when we have a look at his work, we can see the impact of this previous education. And his PhD thesis was on the Alevi and Bektashi tradition from a sociological perspective, and he also has further work in the field, and he also worked in the field of literature. And Semah Aşka Doğrudur is a publication of his, and also from Post Publication House he has new publications, and he was also a coordinator of many international organizations. And the topic he will be talking to us today is very valuable because in the previous session we heard about the law on tekkiye and zaviyes in the Ottoman period. I believe in that regard, his will be a very valuable presentation, and I would like to give the floor to him.
Merhaba. Herkese saygıyla selamlar.
Hello, I would like to greet you all cordially. From the 13th century until 1826, we have the Bektashis functioning as Bektashi Order. However, these lodges were afterwards closed with some flames. When we take a look at the decision made, the decision was made by the relevant authority, and if I'm to make a summary, it goes as follows. Let me give you some information about the fatwa. Some pseudonyms are used. Zayd and Amr, two Arabic names were used, saying that this man said this man said that. That's when as follows. Zayd, in the fatwa, Zayd from the old Sultan, was referring to some villages And if some villages are to be given to the property of Amr, and Amr then gave that which was given and which was endorsed to the sheikhs of a Zawiya and to those who inhabited the rooms of the Zawiya, and with the passage of time, those who endorsed passed away, and those inhabiting the Zawiya began to sin openly and joined those introducing tenets to the faith, being perverts, in other words, and did not live up to the endowment. Would it be permissible for the current sultan to take over these places and dispose of them as he sees fit? The answer, it would be permissible. Well, of course, I mean, the fatwa is quite debatable, and all of these, or none of these, are based on concrete facts. Fatwas, as a part of the Islamic tradition, were configured on abstract things, and these abstract things would be the basis for the decision to be made, and then the manager or the authority would put it into action. Back in 1826, July the 8th, a month after the dissolution of the Janissaries, the Ottoman State forbade the activities of all Bektashi lodges. And Cevdet Pasha notes that on July the 8th, 1826, an audience was held at the mosque at Imperial Palace, attended by the Grand Vizier and Sheikh. Among those who attended the meeting were Hafız Efendi of the Nakşibendi Order, and during this convention, the closing down of Bektashism and Bektashi lodges were also discussed. Let's divide Nakşibendi into two as well. There is Imam Rabbani, the Nakşibendi order of Indian origin. They wanted that to be closed down. And the other sheikh, most of them, said that we wouldn't know of their situation because that's a different order or path, they had said. Actually, if we come to think of it, these people were reluctant to see the forbidding of the lodges and Bektashism, but they kept silence. So this, to start with, first of all, the state somehow put it on their mind to forbid Bektashi lodges and to outlaw them. There's no other way out. And there is a fatwa or a farman that was published, and it refers to, it is an imperial order, and it was sent to all the qadis. These people actually attended the lodges. They would take all the sheikhs and dervish, and one by one they would seize all the goods. They would count them, and then they would take them into the possession of the state. 3 people are said to be executed. One is Istanbul Ağasızade, the Istanbul Ağasızade Efendi, and Salih Efendi. That's the second one. According to research conducted, I mean, we made some search, but I personally wasn't able to find out who this was. And there was this third person, Kıncı Baba Efendi, a Bektashi Baba. They were executed. Kıncı Baba, I will tell you about the details in a few minutes. Kıncı Baba was not an indispensable sine qua non personality. He was one of the Babas at the lodge. My personal interpretation is that those other Babas had important background and the state was not able to seize the others. That's why they decided to execute Kıncı Baba. That's my interpretation. So, as for the outlawing of the lodges and closing of the lodges, the state says a couple of things. For instance, the grounds for the execution were as follows. Blaspheming against the Rashidun Caliph. And ilhat was another ground. That's atheism. Back then, I don't think atheism was a concept. Not fasting, not observing the daily prayer. Blaspheming against the Rashidun caliphs. Ali was one of the caliphate, and it wouldn't be thinkable that the Bektashi Baba would make any blasphemy. For the others they could, but not for Ali. Actually, the main essence of the thing, the main problem was that they were coming together as men and women, and they were sitting together at the tekke. I think this is the only, it's the only claim. I mean, if it's a claim, is that a claim or not? That's something else. Other than that, using bottles of drink, that we can't prove because that's not a part of the record kept by the state. The state itself did not keep such a record. So how are you going to prove that or disprove that? In the book 9771, I don't know whether it's visible. I'm unable to share it. 9771. This book is a historical one in the sense that in this book, the entries made in this book are all the belongings that have been seized. It's not that important, but then yes, no, this is not the one, says the professor. Okay, this is the fatwa. This is the imperial order. The one after this. And no, this is the order, the imperial order for the closing. This is again continuation of the imperial order. Okay, this is the order as well. Okay, this is the fatwa. No, not this one.
Neyse.
Whatever. Let me continue. Kıncı Baba is executed. And the tekke of Kıncı Baba is demolished. And when you take a look at the Bektashi tekke in Üsküdar, you wouldn't be able to find it. They are either given to Nakşibendi or they are converted into madrasas, into some campuses. However, when you take a look at the tomb of Kıncı Baba, an important character, his tomb is located in the courtyard of the mosque known as Cevri Usta Mosque, near Zeynep Kamil Hospital. Let me mention the fact that Zeynep Kamil
Kendisinin Bektashi
is
olduğu.
a lady belonging to the Bektashi Order, and she had an Egyptian background. We know that from the record. And there's this epitaph that reads, bir çera dahi uyardı aleme verdi ziya. So, this man gave light to humanity. And this personality's, this person's final stop is the tomb. And Pīr Fizullah Baba put a landmark in this world. Well, both of them are called Fizullah Baba. The person who built the tomb, that's putting the tombstone, is from the Babagan branch. He was called Feyzullah, and the person executed was called Feyzullah Baba. So there's a reference made to both of them, and the final line goes.
Yani bu ikili bir söyleyiştir.
This is again a duality. It refers to the fact that Haydar's sword has been taken out from its cover, but at the same time it means it no longer sleeps. The sword no longer sleeps. So it's about reawakening. Since this was established during the awakening period, this epitaph was written as such. So, who was sent where? Let's now take a look at that. Hisar Lodge, Postnishin of the Hisar Lodge was exiled to Kayseri. Ahmet Baba Postnishin of the Öküz Limanı Lodge to Hadim. Hüseyin Baba Postnishin to here and there. I mean, many people were exiled. Many examples of exiling, and the state actually takes possession of all these lodges. And it's such a thing that it's quite interesting. During the Ottoman time, there are two soldiers sent to the doorstep of the lodge, and they say, okay, from now on it's forbidden to make entrance and make any exits. That's the order given to the soldiers. Just imagine you receive some information. For instance, Abdal Musa Lodge in Antalya Elmalı. 800 bulls are there. Just think about the land, the width of the land that's run by 800 bulls. The harvest is not made, and then the economic difficulty emerges. Soldiers couldn't understand that. Soldiers are just given an order, and they just stop entries and exits, and this causes significant economic difficulty, and it comes to the minds of the state after 5 years. And they say after 5 years, we should rent this place so that the villagers around will benefit from this. It's not only the Bektashi people around, other people as well are suffering from the situation. So there is a role played by Naqshbandi regarding the dispossession and also the closing of the lodge. First of all, it was Mahmud II. He had put this on his mind. Why? Because of the Janissaries. Because within the Janissaries order, there were 12 Babas, and they were from time to time making a riot, and they had joined them. So the state is willing to close them down because the Janissary that was banned would somehow be underneath supported. The second issue is that Naqshbandi was somehow jealous of the situation. They had some priorities. They had some incentives, and they wanted to benefit from this. They wanted to enjoy the same benefits. This is the reason why, for instance, the daughters of the Sultan belong to the Nakşibendi order, etc. So they, as a result of the activities conducted with them, this closure, the foundation for this closure was made. What we call the Pīr Evi, the large tekke in Haji Bektash, was given to the control of Nakşibendi, and there, until the time came that Mahmud II passed away, Nakşibendi ceremonies would be undertaken, and among the Nakşibendi, among the sheikh, there was a sharing made until when? Until Mahmud II lost his life. Once he lost his life, an interesting situation emerged. There is the Nakşibendi sheikh, but then again, no one could enter into the lodge. Bektashi's entrance was prevented. However, there was also a Dede Baba, and he was there as well. And there is also the Çelebi, meaning the grandchildren of Haji Bektash Velī. They were also there as well. So there were three authorities, so to say. The state calls that multiple authorities. So the Ottoman Empire there did not only put an end to Bektashi, actually Babagyan and Çelebi divisions of Bektashi separated for good, and it was the Ottoman Empire that caused that. Babagyan division and Çelebi division still continue as two separate divisions even today. It was the Ottoman State that saw the Bektashi as a problem and wanted to get rid of them all of them. Now you may say, you may ask whether they were Rafizi. If those people were Rafizi, meaning if those people were rejectors, then so were the Mevlevi people. So they were also coming together as men and women. The same rule applies to the Mevlevi. So, like it was the case in other sects, the same rule applied here. But then again, the state wanted to close them down, and it closed it down. Wanted to seize the belongings, and did so. These are still unsolved problems. These are still unsolved, even today. For instance, there is a picture here. This is Ergeh Baba Tekke. This was just in ruins 40 years ago, 50 years ago. However, it was after a while repaired, maintained, and Kızılbaş School, Alevite Bektashi School is active there. Quite close to Kızılbaş, close to Bektashi, they are active there, and the activity they have there is quite appropriate in accordance with the tradition. But contrary to that, there is something else we are all sorry about. The lodges are planned as classical townhouses. For instance, Emin Baba Tekke in Konak for the last 20-25 years, we see that my interpretation is that it's within the hands of a foundation that doesn't have a close and warm perspective about Bektashi. And this mention should be taken from the foundation to be given to a Bektashi Foundation or Kızılbaş Foundation, so that it would again be a place for Ayni Cem, for the ceremonies of Cem. At least that would make me happy as a person that dedicates his life to this. Yılmaz Hocam, we have gone beyond our time, so would you please wrap up? Sure. I am about to finish. So, in a nutshell, this is all I'd like to share. I would like to greet you all cordially, and I would like to wish you a pleasant day. Thank you. Thank you.
Oturumumuzun bu kısmında Sevtap Demirtaş hanımdan Mevlevi kültürünün en önemli yapı taşlarından biri olan.
In this part of our session, we will be hearing about the Mevlevihanes and their conversions from Ms. Sevtap Demirtaş. After listening to TEKKES, it will be very interesting to listen to Mevlevihanes. I would like to say a couple of words about Sevtap, and she has graduated from the philosophy department of Istanbul University, and she has worked in several civil society organizations. I don't want to list all of them. However, the last among these is the Universal Mevlana Lovers Foundation, and she is working in the PR department of this foundation. Now the floor is hers. Yes.
Mikrofonunuzu açarsanız.
If you could turn on your microphone, please.
Açıldı herhalde.
I'm on, I guess.
Mikrofon açıldı galiba.
I guess you can hear me now. Yes, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Değerli katılımcılar,
Distinguished participants, I would like to greet each and every one of you with respect
saygıdeğer hocamız
and our
Dilaver,
dear Professor Azimli. I hope he rests in peace, and I would like to wish his loved ones
Evrensel Mevlana Aşıkları Vakfı üyesi olarak
peace. As a member of the Universal Mevlana Lovers Foundation, I will be talking about one of the most important structures of the Mevlevi culture, which is the Mevlevihanes and Asitanes, which are full-fledged large Mevlevihanes. I will be talking about the change in these in the historical process. I would like to thank Mr. BERMEK, Mr. Atoğlu, and Ms. Vanessa Obledia for inviting me to this platform. And I would like to thank those who contributed to this activity. Before starting with my presentation, I would like to talk about the concept. And the prophets and their road is enlightened by Muhammad. And he says, when Adam was between water and slime, I was Nebi. And in the religion of Islam, there is both faith and wisdom. And Sufism is coming from the reality of our prophet. And as the traveler follows the path, he comes to the truth, which leads to divine love. As Muhammad said in other hadith, I am the city of wisdom and Ali is the gate. And Hazreti Ali took the essence of this divine path directly from our prophet and became a spiritual guide to all those who march in this path of truth by instilling his talents to those he saw. This way comes from Hazret Ali through two channels. The road from Hasan Basri was called Halveti, and the road from Kümeyl bin Ziyad was called the Hagegan. In the 13th century, where Mevlana lived, Asia and our Europe in general, and Anatolia and the Islamic world in particular, were struggling. There were big difficulties. Crusader invasions from the West negatively affected the Mongols, Anatolia and Islamic world from the East. The Selçuks fought for the throne, and after this, around Amasya, there was the subsequent Babai rebellion, which led to despair among people. In the 13th century, there was a big chaos in Anatolia and in the Muslim world. Mevlana wrote his works and Mesnevi in such an environment. In the formation of Mevlana's knowledge and spiritual personality, we first see the contribution of the family. And every moment he lived and every Islamic mentor he benefited from contributed to this. He began to hear the social and cultural traces of the century and society in Balkh, where he lived first. In 1244, before meeting Şemseddin Muhammed from Tabriz in Konya, Mevlana was a Sufi who was busy with worship. In reality, he could not realize the truths in the depths of his essence, and he couldn't do this alone. He needed a guide to pass on the hidden truths of his potential to action, and this guide was Shams. Hazreti Shams learned how to see and reveal these divine features, truths, and the truth of God, which are deep in the essence of Mevlana. Mevlana found himself in Shams's personality and found his Lord in himself. As stated in one of the poems, he says, "I'm not a Friday mosque. I'm a mosque of humanity. I'm pure in heart. My dervish lodge is the whole world. My madrasa is the whole world. I'm not one of the Sufis with clothing." In fact, Hazreti Mevlana did not come up with a path, and founded on the teachings of Mevlana, the institutionalization was through his son Sultan Veled, and it is a path to beauty, goodness, righteousness, love, tolerance, and in short, good morality. And when we have a look at the Sema ceremonies that are performed, these are also attached to Sultan Veled. When we try to evaluate Mevlevilik, we see that there are 4 periods. The first period is after Mevlana, during which the institutional identity is determined, and it corresponds to 1273 to 1312. And in the second period, we see his grandson, Grand Arif Çelebi, and various travelers, during which his ideals are spread, which corresponds to 1320 to 1529. During this period, many Mevlevihanes were established in Anatolia, the Balkans, Cyprus, Crete, and North Africa. The third period is the circumcision period of Anatolia, and Mevlevi principles were structured on the original foundations once again, and the Aleppo Mevlevi Lodge was closed, and this goes until 1945. The fourth period is starting together with the law enacted on November 30th, 1925, which resulted with the closure of Tekke and ZAVIYES, and which continued with the revival period held in Turkey as Şebi Aruz, reunion night ceremonies are held. In addition to disasters such as large fires, earthquakes, and wars, most of the Mevlevi lodges have been destroyed for legal, administrative, cultural, economic, and social reasons, as well as the weakening and retreat of the Ottoman Empire to Anatolia. Some Mevlevihanes were repaired or rebuilt directly, partly for the above reasons, and converted into museums, mosques, educational institutions, orphanages, and art centers. In the Mevlevi order, we see that the spiritual guidance aims to educate the individual through a special process that includes training full of prayers. Hazreti Mevlana did not appoint his son Sultan Veled, who has deep knowledge and wisdom, as Caliph. And he said, the most similar to me in terms of creation and temperament is you. But he believed that Veled was a strong wrestler. He would win with the right of his own wrist. And by saying this, the post showed that this path, which requires spiritual invention, is not a path to the house, but to the master, by choosing Hazreti Mevlana, by choosing Hüsamettin. At the same time, we see that this order is not passed from father to son with ancestry, but by perfection of the heart. And he shows us that this is possible. And Sultan Veled, afterwards, serving Hüsamettin Çelebi for 11 years, he had the post. Then he was followed by his son Ulu Arif Çelebi, afterwards with Divane Mehmet Çelebi, and most recently Veled İzbudak Çelebi during the Republican period. And they took the highest position, and this heritage was brought to this day. In the 21st century, freedom of belief and worship is still severely hampered. The Presidency of Religious Affairs has its own views and thinking structures and provides groups with a lot of material and spiritual opportunities. They do not provide any support to non-Islamic minority groups such as Nusayri, Syriac, Yazidi, and similar minority groups such as Alevis and Mevlevis. When we have a look at the Mevlevihanes in Turkey and around the world, we see the following. I will conclude after mentioning this. The so-called Āsitanes were full-fledged structures, and their number was around 15. One of them was Mevlevihane in Konya, which is called Āsitane Āliye. This was an administrative center and the place of Çelebis, the postnist of Hazreti Mevlana, and the entire order of Mevlevi. And they were all buried here. The number of small-scale court buildings were called, and the number of zaviyes, which are small court buildings, were around 100. These sites, which are usually planned in the form of complexes, are generally installed in a large garden. Mevlevihanes consist of private sections divided into semahane, square, tomb, ordeal, cells, mutripane, salutation, occupation, haram apartment, kitchen, pantry, small rooms for dervishes. A person who wants to step into the position spends 1,001 days in ordeal to become a dervish, and then he becomes a dervish by the decision of the mentor. Mevlevihanes made great efforts to instill universal friendship, brotherhood, morality, and good manners to people. For centuries, the effects of music and science on Turkish culture have been great. And many people gathered around the Mevlevihanes, studied in many branches of fine arts, and accomplished great success in the scientific field. And Mevlevis has a privileged place in the settlement of love, kindness, and elegance in all areas of social life, especially in human relations. And Konya is the center, but we see it developing in Anatolia, the Balkans, Cyprus, Arabian Peninsula, and North Africa.
170'e ulaşan Mevlevihanelerden
and we see that there are around 117 Mevlevihanes around the world, and of these 48 come to this day, and we can obtain complete information about their existence. Mevlana had tolerance to the society he lived in, he thought that social statuses could change, and he reminded people of their potential. Different individuals from different professions and different beliefs, he was at an equal distance. And today we have Mevlevihanes that are being used for different purposes, and you can see a more detailed presentation about this from the website of the conference. I would like to thank you once again for inviting me to this conference. Thank you very much, Sevtap. Thank you from our side, and thanks again for finishing on time. You contributed to us significantly. In fact, both regarding tekkes, Bektashi tekkes, and in general regarding the Mevlevihanes, we see a policy in place in Anatolia for places of worship. And I would like to say a couple of things about this. If we talk about Alevism, I would like to say a couple of things in this context as well. These interventions against the places of worship for Alevis is, let me talk about a sociological concept, is in fact in time resulted in beliefs without spaces, and these were converted into such practices in time. For example, in 1826, we heard about the interventions told by Yilmaz, and we see that. Let's talk about Bektashi places of worship. These are closed, and these are transferred to Naqshbandis or used by other functions. And sometimes the community leaves this space, and sometimes these spaces are even demolished. If I have a look at a different dimension of the process, I see that Cemevis, there are historical ones in Anatolia, yet the Alevi tradition, the Cem tradition in Anatolia is performed in a hidden manner. This is true both during the Republican era and in the Ottoman Empire. In each Cem ceremony, there definitely is a person who is in charge of controlling the arrival of the soldiers. And this worship and faith practices without spaces is there. And you intervene with all spaces of worship culturally. You are not only interfering to their spaces. The system does not want to see them. They don't want to know about Cem or the ceremony, and they don't want to respect the tradition itself. If this is the case, this becomes a cultural intervention, and when the spaces are lost, the links between the generations is lost, because these spaces are where the cultural transference takes place. And when we have a look at Cemevis, they have many functions, and one of such functions is to have this cultural transference take place. And when you have these spaces demolished, and when you ban the faith itself, and when you tell that the faith is no longer allowed, and we had references to law number 677 several times today, then the link between the generations is lost. And what we have to see is that how the spaces are transformed is one dimension, and the sociological dimension brings together the cultural reflection of it. And in time, we see how things are lost, and this the things that are lost between different generations of Alevis. this session, together with the previous session, specifically deals with places of worship, and I thought about this dimension, and there have been important contributions, I think. I would like to make a correction, if you allow me. While correcting the text, you know that Nusayri is also an Islamic path, and I would like to correct that while I have the opportunity. Thank you, Ms. Demirtaş. So I have a question to Professor Soyer, and this is my personal curiosity. We sociologists, while carrying out sociological analysis, focus on data significantly. I wonder if in 1826, how many tekkes were there? How many of them were distracted? And here now, how many do we have? Do we have any information about the distribution of these in the geographical regions of our country? All of them are recorded on paper. There is a logbook and called 7791. It is in the state archives. And you see the list of all the Bektashi lodges being recorded on this logbook. And everything is counted. If you ask me, in the whole Ottoman geography, there are more than hundreds of Bektashi lodges that are closed. I believe the figure can even be higher. And we all make references to this logbook, but we couldn't focus on each and every one of them individually. Let me elaborate on something. As I said, this became a real economical disaster because these lodges were equivalents of civil society organizations of our day. Bektashi Lodge in itself is not only a lodge. What is being carried out there? You see that individuals who are not employed go there to work, and they work as intermediaries. They go to the market, they sell stuff. So there is economic activity going on in a society where agriculture is the main source of income. You try to take away an area where you have 800 animals, which results to a real economical disaster.
Bir ikinci şey soracağım. Onu da çok merak ediyorum. Yani istatistikleri çok merak ediyorum da. Yanı sıra bu mekanların, tekkelerin
I wonder about the statistics, but I also wonder about one thing. These tekkes to be handled by the Bektashi, of course, I'm not talking about the distracted ones, but the ones that still survive. For the distracted ones, there may be again claims made, but then again, is there an attempt to transfer this back to the Bektashi? Are there lawsuits that have been completed or that are still underway? Yes, I am knowledgeable about some. For instance, currently, there is, I wonder what the name is, says the professor, near to Haliç in Sütlüce, there's a tekke belonging to the Bektashi. They have a lawsuit that's being taken to court, that I know. The second one is across the Golden Horn, what we call a Pīr Loti, and about Pīr Loti. Kar Yağdı Ali Baba is the name of the tekke. I think it's Şahkulu Foundation that overtook that tekke, and they are going to repair it. The tekke in Kazlıçeşme was renovated by late President Turgut Özal, and it was given to Kızılbaş school. They had the repair, and if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, it has been rented for 100 years. But the problematic thing for me, if you ask me, is the one in Edirne Kapı. The tekke in Edirne Kapı is not in the hands of Kızılbaş or Bektashi, but it's a Bektashi tekke. What is it used for? It is now used by a foundation. I don't know what foundation it is. It's just a foundation. Previously, the previous mayor gave it to this foundation. I don't know about the current situation, but because of this pandemic, we are unable to go there for the last 2 years. I'm going to close this one, but before I do that, I'd like to make an additional comment regarding the cultural gap, or when we talk about Naqshbandi, one thing that came to my mind is related to the document in the Ottoman archives. The closing of Alevi tekke, there's always a Naqshbandi practice and doctrine. An example I had seen during the time of Abdülhamid, Kızılbaş Alevites, in order to bring some restriction to their communication and in order to prevent them, they would assign Naqshbandi Hojas to their dergah, and they would be given salaries, and that would be done in disguise. I mean, that's what I read in the document. They're not even putting it into disguise. I mean, just imagine, they are openly stating that. Yeah, I saw that. I read that in the document. Well, I mean, they say that they are doing this in the name of Allah. That's what the looks are. But I mean, this very conference has a very important theme: conversion of spaces and places of worship. This indeed is extremely important. I would also like to refer to the cultural dimension. Just wanted to make a contribution in that sense. We made very good use of our time. We have gone only a few minutes beyond our time. I would like to thank each and every presenter. I'd like to thank each and every speaker. Personally, I benefited a lot from these presentations. Thus, we come to the end of our session. Now let me leave the floor to our presenter.